And just for the recording, we're having a discussion about how we can start bringing in more organizations, more Great Lakes collaborators across our different bioregions to provide greater support and start to weave some coherence across the Great Lakes. And I would love to hear from anybody on this call who's been kind of following what's been going on in the Colorado River, or has any thoughts about how we might be able to start making some connections. Like Kim, you are always so great at bringing in new people. Are there any thoughts on how we can kind of help support some of these things? I know that one of the things that I wanted to do also was to start practicing telling our story of place. That's one thing that we'll be doing later in this call.
Yeah, so in terms of like bringing in people, I just sometimes just happen to meet, people in different places, and there are connections in a lot of intersecting groups. So I feel like we need to get even a better handle on what's happening in Cleveland. I've said this before, Cleveland, there's so much going on, so many wonderful things happening, and it's very tightly woven. I'm curious about what is Cleveland's role in this whole southern shore of the Great Lake area. It stretches all through Ohio. So that's just kind of a question I'm keeping open. And not in terms of like recruiting businesses or people to come into, you mean for the design school? I feel like, oh no,
not necessarily the design school, but more so to be able to start having some collaboration across. So I mean, when we come here, we share a lot of resources, we share stories about what's happening in our areas, but it is primarily individuals that are showing up and sharing what they're doing individually, where we would love to have more so people who are engaged in projects coming and saying, this is what's happening in Cleveland, and something similar is happening in Buffalo. How can we start sharing across those lines? So those are just some things that we're thinking about. And I think one of the potentials is, just maybe having, rather than having like bi-weekly meetings, potentially having, monthly meetings where it's more, have specific topics that we can support on or things like that.
Oh yeah, so there's tons of, there are tons of people that would probably come if invited and share what's going on in the region, if that's, were to be. Are you talking about gathering more people around together, or, coming up with a set agenda, certain topics? But yeah, I think that would be nice. We could easily do that if the group decided we wanted to. Peter knows a ton of people. Dave Nash does. Our core group of people who helped, bring Joe and Penny here to this region. Yeah. And I think it'd be nice to have in-person things too, like you all did with, it was Susan, right? Last week. Yeah, the week before that, Susan and I, we had our own private bioregional call. We were the only two here, and it was lovely. It was very lovely. So if I could have been at that little shindig, I would have. So
yes, it was very nice.
Yeah, what I'd like to propose is that because it's summer and there's a lot happening in people's lives during the summer, that we put the Great Lakes meetings on pause, maybe meet in a month, and look at what we can learn from the Colorado River Basin experience, because they're trying things out right now in terms of different formats for the meetings and ways to bring people together. And we're also looking to reach out to, as I say, some of the other Great Lakes wide organizations for input. So that was, and then look for ways to structure the meetings that really support the work that we're all doing in our respective areas.
So could I just offer a couple of thoughts? Yeah, I'm anxious to hear how Colorado unfolds. One of the differences between Cleveland and Toronto is that there is no one single organization that is coordinating the connectivity. As Kim mentioned, I mean, Dave Nash, I didn't mention specifically, and I have been outreaching to the management school and the business community. There's the health community I mentioned, arts and culture, education. Kim and I are both at a university. We have reached out to two organizations, and this will get to my question. The Western Reserve Land Conservancy, which is very vital here, and also the Northern Ohio Area Coordinating Council, NOACA, which is actually doing some planning around strategic planet and climate. And I could add the Cleveland Tree Coalition that are trying to increase the tree canopy. These are all, and also the political groups. David Berenson, you might be interested. I went to the Cleveland State University meeting of mayors with the Cuyahoga Commissioner, who knows what we're up to here, Chris Renane. So but the issue is how do you create the vision for a bioregional focus when historically it's been strong in Cleveland, starting in the 1990s, but it hasn't unfolded in a way where any one particular organization or even a small group of organizations, Kim, David, Jillian, David, I will represent or parts of organizations, but we are not an organization in the same way that the Legacy Project is. So I'm not sure, Kim, you said something interesting. You said there's a lot going on in Cleveland, and I agree. And then you said it's something about tightly connected or something. And I feel it's actually loosely connected. So Kim, you're probably better than I am at tying the connections. But yeah, we know lots of people. We've got lots of people involved, but it's a question of how do you move forward in an integrated fashion? So sorry for being a bit long-winded, but that was my thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to be honest, I feel like that's how most places are, is like there's so many organizations and so many groups that are doing so many different things. And they're all focused on their individual projects versus something that's working towards a coherent whole. I know that's the same way here in Buffalo. Brian, I see you unmuted if you wanted to say something.
What Joe and other bioregions have found so far is that if there's an activation team, so a group of individuals, could be with different organizations or with the same organization, if there's an activation team that holds the process in the bioregion, so is able to bring people together around the bioregional vision, and is able to start doing the weaving, because a lot of the initial work has to do with identifying all the great work that's currently being done in your bioregion and looking for synergies between the work that's being done. And often what we're finding here in the greater Toronto bioregion is there's a lot of great work being done in individual silos that other people don't know about. And once you start linking people up and making them aware of what's happening across the bioregion, there's a lot more collaboration, cooperation, and teamwork. So if you're able to form a core team of individuals to hold that process and to do that weaving, it's really helpful to get everything started.
And I actually, so not to put you on the spot, Jay, but because you're part of the Western New York Environmental Alliance, that's kind of one of the things that I think is a strong suit of Buffalo, is that there is that coalition of so many different organizations. And I don't know if you have any insight that could potentially help. So places like Cleveland, where there isn't kind of that core coalition, do you find that it's been helpful in making decisions and supporting long term?
Well, difference between discussions and decision making is pretty massive. I mean, we've been talking, working, doing projects And decision-making comes on different levels. I mean, you have political decision-making, you have economic decision-making. And one of the things that we've always experienced in Western New York is that there's a competition for funding because everyone wants to have a big organization with a big staff. And sometimes, people come to loggerheads about that and don't cooperate and work very well together. So that's been part of our struggle. It's one of the reasons that we created the Environmental Alliance, to bring people together, to have them at the same table. We have over 100 organizations and over 400 individuals. And we basically talk, we develop projects, we support projects, we criticize projects if we have to. We work within a media realm, we work within a political realm, and we work within our community realm. And one of the reasons we started Birds of the Niagara is an opportunity to actually get more information out there and bring more people in about issues that people don't normally think about. Our area of between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, which is the Niagara River corridor, is one of the most abundant, biodiverse, bird-centric, and other things on the planet. And we can celebrate that stuff in winter. And we end up getting a lot of people's interest when we build a conservation movement. We build, a bird-centric movement. We build a social justice movement. And so we have a lot of tools to play with here. We have a globally significant important bird area. We have a brand new Ramsar designation, and these are kind of large, bioregional constructs, if you will, that helps us develop tools to say, okay, well, if you're going to be developing this area, Buffalo Outer Harbor or shorelines or whatever, we already have some conservation determinations about the area that we'd like to have you consider when you make your decisions. It's always a struggle. It's a daily struggle. Here it is 2023, and we're, dealing with climate issues 100 times a day. And so staying stable, staying engaged, and both on a personal level and a professional level and a institutional level is always the struggle. But you know what? We're doing it. I get up every day, and I know a lot of people get up every day saying this is a great time to be alive. Are we moving forward? I don't know. It doesn't look like the Earth is doing all that well, but we're still in the game, and we still have a lot of hope, and we still have a lot of work that we're doing. So I don't know. It's maybe a longer-winded answer than you were looking for, but yeah, we're pretty connected in Western New York, and there's always needs to do more, and that's what we did.
Could I ask Jay a question? And by the way, I know when you would get to the sense of place exercise, which I thought was interesting, Anna, it might be worthwhile mentioning where the other regular meeting is on cognitive on mapping. Sorry, because I do think that having that sense of place and having our places connected is really an important part of the work. Jay, you're right. I mean, with the Quebec fires, we've been having poor air quality. I've got air purifiers running these days. How do you find finding a balance between trying to hit people over the head as they choke on poor air quality or whatever the particular environmental challenge of the moment is, and offering something that represents the hope for the future? I mean, I sometimes say that our biggest ally in making change in our civilization is Mother Nature, because she is increasingly telling us that we're not doing things very well. But we, as you said, some of us have had that lesson for a long time, and we haven't been able to infiltrate the power structures in a consistent way. So how do you balance bringing the obvious to people's attention that the climate and weather are getting worse, and kind of holding out something that makes people a bit more hopeful?
Well, I would start by saying that, pragmatic solutions are there, whether it's on a intensely local context or a larger context. We can always say, here's some things that you can do, that we can do, that we should think about, we should know about. And those range from, everything from recycling to big development decisions. The problem is getting the news to people on a consistent way so that they are continuously engaged and aware of it. And so part of the work that we do is we work very hard to try to find strategies to get information out, to agencies and not-for-profits and individuals and communities. And that's the challenge. That's always the challenge. The media has changed so much in the last several years as we go through COVID. The politics have changed so much. So we're always trying to put ourselves in front of people, groups, the media, and saying, hey, you know how polluted we are at this end of Lake Erie? I mean, Cleveland, you know, we share Lake Erie with you guys, and we have these seiches, and we're in one of the most plastic polluted places in the world, this end of Lake Erie, because all of the plastic gyres that come through the lakes come into Buffalo. We have more dense plastic here than we have in the Great Pacific Plastic Patch. So who knows about that? Well, I mean, we've had studies, we've been talking about it for years. We've started to reintroduce those topics. We've had some media coverage in the last couple of weeks. And people are saying, well, wait a minute, that's our water. Our water intake is right in the middle of that gyre. If you can phrase it in the right way, you can get media attention. If you get media attention, you can get other engagement, including political engagement. So anyway, it's a big, complicated problem, but the answer is, you know, just get up every day and get to work. Sucks sometimes, you know, it's hard to breathe today in Buffalo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and a couple of thoughts here too. And so one is, you mentioned the issues around competition for funding, and just tagging another discussion, or effort in design school, is around working on a collaborative funding ecosystem. So part of what's in play is some sort of movement towards that. Yeah, also on mapping, so there are other meetings, regular meetings within the design school. So I believe just this afternoon, I couldn't make it myself, but was part of a regular discussion on bioregional atlas, headed by Brandon Litzinger in Cascadia. Yeah, and then just I guess an observation around the nature of the discussion, and what seems central are the connections between well, the need for coordination of resources and actions with storytelling and narrative, and just trying to make sense of what our inquiry and project is about. And just to name that's central. So a question that I have, it's ongoing, but how those interplay with each other, and how to tell a bioregional story in a way that somebody, say, is working on tree planting, isn't seeing that as a distraction from their immediate goals, but is able to think ecologically and be able to tell a story ecologically or bioregionally, so as to help others see holistically as well. That's what I think we're driving towards. So that I see part of my efforts driving towards, and that involves not just changes in decision making, but even on a more subtle level, on identity. And when Peter brought up the work around the noosphere, and I put that in the same kind of category. How do we tell stories that invoke paradigm changes that enable different forms of coordination? So that's how to sort of articulate that. And yeah, and he was really super interested in getting updates on what's happening with Benji's work in Colorado, and thinking about what we can learn from them, but what also the differences are in the Great Lakes. So we can think of the story as being spoken for the bioregion, and then just the geography and the topology of the Colorado system is very different. So I imagine that leads to a different sets of opportunities and impediments for coordination, and of different forms of story. Because the river you can follow down, and you can see how the physicality of the river could mirror a form of narrative. The Great Lakes don't have that kind of ecology or geography. So what's the proper, or proper is maybe too strict, but what's a functional story for our bioregion? The shape of it, I imagine, is going to be different too. So I thought it was interesting that I think Kim, did you mention the shoreline of the southern shoreline of Lake Erie? So perhaps shorelines, right, are one way to structure that. So yeah, those are things I want to keep on returning to. Yeah.
Just to quickly add to that, we, in Cleveland, we also have the Cuyahoga River, which has this great history of having been on fire, being so polluted, but it's cleaner now, which also led to cleaning up Lake Erie.
Yeah, I
Um,
resonate more with the feelings of hope. Sorry, Dave, I thought you were done. Go ahead.
I thought I was too. So go ahead.
No.
Oh, well, so, what we were talking about in terms of how best to move ahead organizationally, this might seem obvious, but I found in many organizations that things work best when you have that central planning group that I think Anna or Brian were talking about. But combined with there being active events you're working on, either events or legislation or decisions or something, so that it keeps people active and it's not just meeting and talking, but it's the combination of having that basic group organizationally and having things going on where you always know what the next thing is going to be going on when that one thing is happening.
Yeah,
Take it away, Kim.
oh, yeah, I was gonna say I agree with that, David. And sorry, Kim, I didn't mean to cut you off. You can go next.
No, I was just going to mention that something with me. I tend to just keeping it in our conscious awareness of, Earth first. And I mean, that's why I do keep mentioning the southern shore of the Great Lake Erie to help develop a bioregional sensibility, right? So because people are not like really focused on that spread out type of area location. And also just mentioning that the stories of hope, or what can be done when you hear the story. Like, I did not know the story about that we have more plastic than other places until just now. So, but I have something I can do. I'm engaged in this a little bit, and you have to have that opening where people can go to do something positive, because it's about the restorative, right? The restoring and transformation, and just our daily lives, like our food, like where we get our food, where we get our water, those types of things. That's what I'm interested in, just helping develop. And I think there are a lot of people that feel the same way, that just may not all be organized in one place.
Yes, the talking about our personal stories of place, how we connect with the land on which each of us lives, will help others understand the different landscapes, the different bioregions in the Great Lakes Basin. And that's one thing that we've seen in the Colorado River discussion so far, is the story of place of individuals at the headwaters of the Colorado are very different from the stories of place further along the Colorado River, and certainly stark contrast from Mexicali, where the Colorado River used to flow into a beautiful delta in the Sea of Cortez, which is totally gone now. So very different stories of place. And I think that once we see the results of Benji's process, and he's trying different things, and they're also working on a narrative for the whole Colorado River Basin from different perspectives, and also looking at Indigenous perspectives. So once we're following along his process, and we're helping to advise during the process, Anna, myself, and others. We're going to take all the learnings from that and then bring it back to the Great Lakes group and come up with a way for us to adapt it to our unique context. Because yes, the Great Lakes Basin is very different than the Colorado River Basin. There are ways they're similar, ways they're different, and how do we adapt all the learnings from that basin to this basin? So that's one thing that we're going to be looking at very carefully and bring back to everyone.
Hi, Jay.
Can I jump in just
Oh, okay.
quickly?
Yeah.
I'm going to go in a second, but one story that I like to tell is the connectivity of the Great Lakes, of Buffalo. We're all connected. I mean, I'm connected to Toronto, I'm connected to Cleveland. physically. I mean, you know, we do our bird festival in the wintertime. Toronto's one of our big audiences. We're not that far. So is Cleveland. But we're also connected by just human relations. People in the Colorado River Basin, a lot of those people are immigrating into our region now, and we have those cultural things to share. And we can talk about that around the whole earth. So that kind of connectivity. Nature also connects us. One of the big stories I like to tell is how connected we are with birds in the wintertime. We have birds in the wintertime that come down here from the Arctic that you know, this is their Miami Beach. They go on the Niagara River, so we have snowy owls and all sorts of waterfowl. In the summertime, we have birds that go to Central America, South America, the Amazon, that repopulate the Amazon. And so our connectivity to helping nature, helping bioregionalism, we can help the Arctic by being better conservation stewards here. We can help the Amazon by being better, and we can make real connections and real stories. Monarch butterflies, all of these things that connect us to nature and as people are really important stories. That's what I wanted to say, is that's just that you talk about storytelling. That's a big part of the storytelling that I do. So that's all.
Yeah, I love everything you said, Jay. And these are the types of stories that if we share across all the areas of the Great Lakes, will deepen our understanding of the whole thing, and will deepen the understanding of the challenges, the unique challenges that each of us are facing in each of our bioregions, but also connect the connections through the birds and other wildlife that are going up and down North America, South America. Beautiful ways, because we want to find ways to tell stories to get more of the public to connect to their place. Because by and large, urban dwellers are very disconnected from where they live, from their place, and we need to do more storytelling, find ways that really resonate with people, and the more we can help the public connect to their place, the better better success we'll have in regenerating the whole bioregion.
Thank you so much. It's nice to. I'm going to leave in a minute.
Okay.
That's all.
David?
Thanks. Bye, Jay. Thank you for your input, and it's nice to meet you this way. So, but I wanted to say that, especially talking about plastics, a good friend of mine who's on our Cuyahoga County Council has been the main person to push the plastic bag ban in Cuyahoga County, and it went through despite a lot of opposition from industry. But it's in place and it's still being like fought against. But my personal issue here is that when I go buy things in bulk at stores, there are now signs from the FDA that say we're not allowed to bring and reuse our containers. And they no longer have plastic bags, so they expect us to get a new plastic container every time we get something in bulk. I resist this and I use my own containers anyway, but occasionally I get somebody who confronts me in the store. And so now I go to the checkout lane that doesn't have a person, because then I just go through. But this is just this is a federal ruling, I guess, and I don't know where it came from or how long it's been in, but we used to be able to do that, and now they're telling us we can't. So.
Hi, Jay. Yeah. Oh, and how frustrating. That's like the that just ends up creating more plastic waste. Heavier plastic, thicker plastic. Well, before we get too far in, I'm glad that we started to have this conversation, and I think it's a really good starting point for what I had sent out in an email to some people, was to think about our story of place as we come here. And that's one thing that that Benji had started out with, and we did in our at Susan's house, her gathering in Toronto, where everybody brought their story of place. What was most important to them from the place that they come from? Where did they connect? But also, like, what do locals talk about when you talk about your place? What's most important? Like, obviously, the Cuyahoga River is a big place in Cleveland, but I wanted to take some time, and I think that as we are moving forward, as Brian mentioned, potentially putting this typical meeting on pause, but maybe turning it into a monthly campfire similar to what Benji hosts, where we can continue to explore our story of place while we're working towards maybe kind of a that where we want to go with our group moving forward, so that we don't lose this momentum of meeting with each other and continuing to kind of focus on our stories. So if you haven't thought of your story of place, definitely feel free to like think of it while other people are sharing it. I didn't send out that email to everybody. I just sent it out to the people who like Peter and Kim that are part of our regulars. But I can start off by modeling a story that I would share. And it is, hi. One of the things that I oftentimes think about is I'm a longtime Buffalonian, and one of the biggest differences between my story of place that I am developing for myself and what I've been talking to Benji about is that both sets of my grandparents lived in Buffalo. My maternal grandmother's parents and her grandparents were from Buffalo. I've spent my life learning stories about this place and how it's developed over time. I know what it was like when Cazenovia Creek was gutted and the soft shorelines were turned into hardened concrete shorelines, what that was like as it went through people's neighborhoods, because my grandparents lived there and they lived through it. I know about how the air quality has changed over the decades because I hear these stories. I hear about how different areas were plowed down to create new developments. That's something that I know, where out west, what Benji was saying is most people are transplants. Most people have just come there. You know, these settlements just popped up about 100 years ago. They don't have the same connection that we do out here, where generations of families have lived here for long periods of time. So I thought that that was really interesting, that we probably have very different stories of place just because of the length of time people, well, I guess settlers have been living here and developing, and probably a lot of our families have been here. So that was just kind of one of the things that kind of struck me about what's different, what's unique about Buffalo and my place. In particular, just learning more about how the rivers have changed over time for human benefit has been really interesting. But yeah, so would anybody else like to share what they have been thinking about in terms of what's important for them in their place?
Yeah, Peter just shared in the chat. Thanks, Anna and all. My places are my oak tree and my attic playground. Now in use by, I think he has one or more grandchildren with him this afternoon. So I'll share my story of place. For the last, I guess, 26 years or so, I've lived on the Oak Ridges Moraine, and that is the heart of the greater Tkaronto bioregion. It's a unique geologic feature. The retreating glaciers 10,000 years ago left this 200-kilometer stretch of rolling hills of sand and gravel. And these hills just soak in the rainwater like a giant sponge, and that they release it north and south to over 65 rivers and streams. So it's a huge landform, and many rivers flow south through the city of Toronto and other municipalities, and some flow north. But eventually all the water ends up in the Great Lakes. So that's the defining feature. And living on the moraine, you experience the soil. It's very sandy soil. If you're planting a tree and you're digging into the soil, it's sand. by and large, with a little bit of topsoil on top. And then if you're experiencing the water, when it rains, you don't see a lot of movement of water because it soaks in. We live in the country, we're fortunate to live in the country. And then you experience the water in terms of when you're traveling, you see the streams and rivers and lots of natural springs feeding them. If you have a well, as we do, you're harvesting some of that water for your own use as well. So being appreciative of having an abundance of water is one of the unique defining characteristics of this area. Water, land, and trees, where the water meets the trees, as we say in the design school on the new GTV space.
I'm just going to mention something more small scale as to my place. I have a small inner suburban yard, and I'm in the process of making it as little lawn to mow as possible by converting everything to other growing things to feed the bees and the birds and everything, and myself. I grow berries, and we're right on the last edge of mulberry season here in Cleveland. I don't know if it's the same thing in the Buffalo or Toronto area or Ann Arbor. But this year was a banner year for mulberries. They were all over the place. And I happen to have an albino mulberry tree in my backyard, which means it doesn't stain everything. Black and purple. So anyway, that's my love, and I try to introduce my daughter, who's 12, to the ideas of why I do what I do to save the earth for her.
Yeah, mine is around the same type of a smaller scale, thinking of place, and the place is just exactly right here, like where I am, and my house. I'm fortunate there's a little nature preserve behind me, and I'm in a typical suburb, and there's so much cement around, which really makes me angry now. But one night I sat out on my back deck that I hadn't done. I think I lived here about 7 years at that time, and was going through some stuff, and just sat out back, and I realized that there's a path that goes through my backyard, that wildlife or our backyard, that just the animals take. And that night they just came through, and I was looking at them, and they were looking at me, and it's a totally different mind shift when you're not just observing, but being observed by, our more than human world at a time when I didn't even have those words of more than human world, right? So just that everything I feel is right here. When COVID happened and our university went to complete remote operations, I had my mornings to sit outside. I watched birds teach their babies to fly, observe all kinds of different things that matter today in more of a way like, oh, systemically, yeah, there are a lot of things that we have to do. But we don't have to be in a specific place. It's anywhere. And then the last thing is, I'm friends with people. I co-host a little dialoguing group with people in Ukraine on Saturdays, and it was the same type of story. And my friend was talking about, now that's a cement city, like a lot of the architecture and stuff. But this one person has little squirrels, that's like keeps as a pet. And one morning he was just watching what they do, And it's the same type of thing, which I know is an element of permaculture too, just to be observant. But anyway, I'm just for everyone being able to appreciate where they are, no matter where they are.
Yeah, it's very provocative. One thing you said was about going out and being observed. I think most people aren't able to easily access that awareness. Like, and I think of discussions around artificial intelligence and committees to search for extra human intelligence, but we're surrounded by extra human intelligence. So already, so by that, I mean, that's referring to a specific kind of like symbolic, self-reflective, uh, abstract intelligence, but there are other kinds too. And who knows how distinct that is just to humans. So part of the storytelling is like bringing that awareness out, like what sort of magical moments can they create? The birds are actually looking back and they have some sort of cognition and feeling around that. That's itself a breakthrough. So yeah, that's really great. I mean, from my place, I think about I live in a little co-housing community, and we're lucky because we have some woods with some nice trails, and there's a small but natural prairie, so no pesticides are used, and the birds are always out there, and it's very thriving. And I sort of get that from my outside my back door. So yeah. So what sort of stories can connect? And a lot of those, like, because we're pretty small, like beings, we can walk outside and connect to a pond in my case, or a little prairie. So that's a good starting point. And like what sort of stories can then connect that awareness to the bigger scale? So yeah, I'm thinking about like ways we could make connections by seeing like was brought up before, migratory routes, for example. Like the birds are passing through, but they actually began somewhere far away and they're going some far away, and I'm in this moment connected in that strand, and that's magical, you know? Or like how the microcosm reflects the macrocosm, the little backyard, like what sort of like uh cases are very can powerfully illustrate what's happening at a small scale as well as what's at a big scale. So in this watershed, we're experiencing the issues that involve like maybe chemical pollution and some other activities that are themselves a small picture of what's happening across the entire Great Lakes region. What sort of those things, like stories like that, can help make that connection. Yeah.
Thank you, David. Bye. Yeah, and I think that that's what strikes me the most about the story of place is that it can be so one of the things that I think that they're trying out with the Colorado River is every different community brings their own story of place, but how can you develop a higher and overall story for the entire place? And that might not always be super relevant for every single person in individual bioregions. It might be the fact that in order to generate energy within your community, when you're communicating with people who live in that place, it is more important for them for you to speak at that bioregional level. People in Toronto care about Toronto, and not everybody would be motivated to hear about how it's affecting all of the Great Lakes. But then there are a lot of people who get very motivated and inspired by thinking big and connecting with subcontinent or the entire continent in that way. So how can we kind of link our stories together and see what's similar, what's different? That's kind of what I would like to potentially explore a bit more and help and having a campfire. Where do we have those overlapping stories and where are those differences, so we can really start to get to know our places. So I'm interested to hear if that's would be something that you'd be interested in. I mean, Kim, you have been, I think, at every single meeting, even more meetings than I have been. So I'd be interested to hear what you think about potentially changing it up a bit where we have more of this open, free flowing. I know that we had mentioned doing this, but maybe once a month or once every other week where we would just have an open campfire.
Yeah, I mean, I think opportunity to insert some spaciousness in whatever gathering we have allows for more to come through. Like, and if we're talking, especially if we're talking about like consciously co-creating something together, because we're doing it whether we're thinking of it or not. So there's, you know, there's that. I would, yeah, definitely be for that. But also I would say that Joe has a really great description of the Great Lakes bioregion and you know, there's no place else like this on earth in terms of the, you know, the geography and stuff like that. And he talked about that the very first time I just came to a meeting, because Anna, I was just curious.
Mm.
And so there is something, and there's something to be said about, you know, speaking with the same voice on those types of big things. It makes sense. And I don't know anyone who doesn't want to know more about this place we're at. And, you know, we all know around the Great Lakes, we all know inside, and always have, I think, how important it is. And it has to do with water on the earth right this moment. So it connects us all.
Yes, Joe's greater story of the Great Lakes Basin really resonates, and he does it so well. And that's definitely a great starting point when you're talking to other people about it. And we all, regardless of where we are in the Great Lakes, we all share responsibility and stewardship for the quality of the water, because most of us are drinking this water unless we're on a well, and our wastewater is going back into the lake. Runoff from commercial industrial farms, residential is running back into the lake. So we all share a responsibility for that shared stewardship of this great resource, this abundance of water that's unique on the planet that we share. And one of the interesting things was Benji told the story of a drop of water starting out from the headwaters of the Colorado and going down the river, and the different experiences of that drop of water. So we could do the same sort of exercise with the Great Lakes, possibly. Maybe a drop of water starts out in Lake Superior, goes down to Lake Huron, Lake Erie, Niagara Falls to Lake Ontario, and what the drop of water experiences along the way in terms of where the hot spots are, in terms of things coming into the lake, and other things like that. It could be an interesting story to build together.
And maybe looking through different lenses, right? Because, you know, I think what resonates most with me is just the indigenous perspective. You know, water is alive, you know, and being in relationship with water. And we're 70% water. You know, there's just, you know, so much like that. There's all different ways, and it would be interesting and maybe fun to share the story through different lenses.
Yeah, and I think I'd also do well to understand the stories that are already out there about the Great Lakes. So in one sense, we're interested in this because that's an existing, you know, part of our culture. I know I learned about the Great Lakes when I was in elementary school, so that's been in there, and it's something that we can also tap into, right, in the culture at large. So what are the stories? What's the history? And I'm starting to keep a list of different organizations and institutes and groups that have Great Lakes in their name. So how are those groups or organizations telling the story? You know, what's working there? What's missing? You know, because we're not starting from scratch. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that these are some really great ideas. I'm almost feeling like perhaps that could be almost like the theme of the meetings that we come to. So before you come to the meeting, try to think in terms of the certain perspectives that we indicate each month, and take time to learn a little bit, and then bring what you've learned about your place from the Indigenous perspective, from the you know, current restoration projects perspective. That might be interesting. I mean, even some of the pictures that you see about like the different depths of the lakes, I even find that really interesting. Like how much deeper Lake Erie is the shallowest of the lakes, but there's just a huge drop off between all of our lakes and Lake Ontario. It's actually surprising how much farther below or closer to sea level Rochester is in comparison to everybody else. And just kind of talking about some of those things might be interesting.
And I also think it's important to, when we can, tie things to climate as well, because that's like almost like the big umbrella. And I remember, and I haven't ever done this, but there's something visioneering, and the steps are so there's the problem first, solution second, why we have to do something third, and why we have to do something right now in terms of framing something. And now I'm not into any problem solution type of scenarios at all. I think that things emerge and we can help, curate that. But still, if you're just talking about messaging, some things can work like that, and why we've got to do something right now, is definitely timely.
Oh, great. So before we kind of get into our closings, I did just want to mention too, I know Chad, you were talking a little bit about the mapping, but just to give a little preview of next week, where Elliot and I have been working on the PowerPoint that we shared. And Kim, I think that you were probably the last person to see the PowerPoint, or some of the community mapping ideas that we're bringing. So our next meeting on Monday is going to be a community art project. We are focusing on the Niagara River just as an example, but we essentially are trying to develop a workshop that we could potentially bring to a community on the ground in person, that we could use to show off community maps. So while this is a focus on the Niagara River, it's really more of a pilot, just picking a place rather than a specific place that you have to connect with. So what we'll be doing is we'll be sharing some information about the Niagara River, sharing stories that we have along that connect to our artwork that we'll be drawing. Both Elliot and I are going to model that, kind of like choosing what you're gonna draw and what's important to you. And then we want to have just a conversation about what's important to you about your waters, what about your waterway, about having healthy waters. The theme of our maps are going to be swimming as a river, so cleaning up water so that it's to the point where it's actually safe enough for humans to swim in. That's not currently what the Niagara River is like right now. So when we're talking about what's important to us, you can pick anything that is relative to where you are as well. What are the animals and plants that you would see in a healthy ecosystem in your area along your waterways? What are some of the characteristics of your rivers and your watersheds? And then bringing it back, and you can either continue on with that idea, or what are some similar characteristics that might show up in the Niagara River watershed if you want to draw something related to the Niagara River. And then we're going to be doing some artwork together, and Claire Atwell is going to be helping to lead the workshop as well, because she is the master of community art. So I hope that everybody would be able to join us next week as we kind of experiment with how this is going to be. This is very much just a practice for us, to see how this might go over with a community group. Yeah. So I don't know if anybody has anything else they'd like to add, or we can do a round and close out. Yeah, maybe do a final checkout. Feeling really grateful for everybody who showed up today. I'm just also very happy that someone from Buffalo has joined, and that we were able to kind of share some of the stuff that's going on out this way. I think that I really would love to have the opportunity to continue to bring more people in, like Kim, all the friends that you've brought in. I feel like it's always so refreshing to hear new perspectives. It's great to have the consistent voices too, but I think it's definitely revitalizing, and I'm excited to see how we can continue to move forward in supporting this vision. And I'll pass it to Chad.
Yeah, echo all that, and thought it was a really good conversation. I have a lot of food for thought to mull over, and yeah, just thinking about ways to connect what we're talking about here with people that I'm connected with in my area. Yeah, so it's nice to see that there's interest and folks being invited from the outside and popping up and hopefully becoming part of the inside if that calls them. And yeah, just reminding me to extend those invitations to my community. So thank you. Pass it on to Kim.
Thank you. And I'm just checking out with gratitude again, like every time. And I learned, I have a friend who's teaching a course, a college course this autumn, and has adopted or adapted Joe's book is part of the course, Design Path. And it's in a section of the fourth part of the class, which is on envisioning positive futures. And I think as I get more information about that, I'll share that, because it's a really cool course on science, spirituality, and politics. And just I'm happy to share that.
That's really exciting. You should definitely like post that in the design school, that's happening. That's so cool.
Yeah, well, I want to tell Joe and Penny first. I mean, they know about some of this because my friend wants to interview Joe for a podcast, with someone else, so too. So, yeah, but I didn't know about the framing of it and being part of, after reading the book, that's where he thought that fits, which makes me very happy. Envisioning positive futures. So I'll pass over to Brian.
Thanks, Kim. Enjoyed hearing the stories today and connecting with everyone, and leaving with feeling our stories.
All right, thanks everyone. Hope to see you next Monday. Bye.
Sounds like fun.
Bye-bye.